Some folks believe that when you die, you go to heaven. I write that with a capital H in case it really does exist, and in case there's a chance in hell I'll ever get to go there. Not real sure why I capitalize hell. Maybe for the same reason I capitalize Oklahoma. Anyway, heaven. These folks believe you go to this place which is joyous and infinite and without any of our earthbound trials and tribulations and those distractions which might lead one down the path to hell, which is why once you get to heaven, you're for all intents and purposes stuck there. You'll see all of those loved ones who meet the criteria of having gone before you and having led similarly righteous lives. I think of some of my loved ones who have passed before me and are probably in heaven, and while I still love them, bless their hearts, the idea of spending eternity with them sounds a lot more like the definition of hell. More often than not, it was a struggle to just get through Thanksgiving dinner, which, as I recall, only seemed to last an eternity. But I digress. Apparently, one of the main requirements for going to this swell place, heaven, is that you have to believe you're going there. You don't just live a righteous life and wind up there surprised, thinking, well, I guess this sure beats the hell out of nothing. And if I've understood what I've read and been told, believing you're going there sometimes trumps actually living a righteous life, and there's a little loophole whereby you can sin like a motherfucker, even using words like motherfucker, torture bunnies, drink, gamble, have sex with hookers, make fun of nuns, maybe even send some righteous folks to heaven. And if you ask for forgiveness, you still got your ticket. Seems to me this would kind of give an unfair advantage to those dying long, slow deaths and leave those who get shot in the head or hit by a train or a fallen meteor sucking everlasting hind teat, as it were. Trust me, I know the taste of hind teat. Another existential conundrum posed by all this eternity stuff is that no matter how good a life you lead, how much you abide by all the rules that'll get you to heaven, there's a better than even chance you'll have been abiding by the wrong set of rules, because while it's generally agreed the world over by those who believe in God that there's just one of them, there seems to be some severe and rather violent disagreement as to just exactly which team he's coaching. For instance, if he's coaching a baseball team, you can be the best, most righteous damned soccer player in the world, yet in that moment when you free up your deathbed, you're going to be in for a rude awakening, or lack thereof. I cannot conceive of a situation more maddening than to know you had spent your entire life forsaking cussing and bunny torturing and drinking and gambling, not to mention hooker fucking and nun ridiculing, only to find you could have gone to town on that shit for all the good it did you. Now that would be an eternal aggravation. I think if Vegas set odds on all this, you'd have a better chance of winning sinning. Which kind of sounds like a country song, don't it? On the other hand, there are those who believe that death is an abyss, the big nothing, that we make our own heavens or hells right here on earth during whatever amount of time we have allotted, which is, at the very least, a more convenient way to look at it. There are even those who believe that life is but a dream and death is an awakening from that dream. Not sure I even understand that, because it seems it would mean that everybody would be having the same dream, and I've always kind of liked to keep my dreams to myself. Besides, what would be the difference between a dream perceived by everyone as reality and true objective reality, if such a thing exists? I'll leave that to the philosophers. They've got more inclination to ponder such things, although it seems like I may have infinitely more time. Wilson, Tennessee is a small town of about 14,000 located in the Cumberland Valley, about a half-hour's drive east of Nashville. The seat of Wilson County, it has all the charms of a small southern town. Friendly folk, a town square, a single movie theater, although a full 2 generations have no memory of it having a single screen, and gossip that flies as carefree as the Confederate flag that waved over the courthouse until almost 1970. While political pressure from Nashville, the threat of withholding money, brought the flag down, gossip remains unencumbered. Northerners like to imply it's a Southern thing, but gossip's been around almost as long as people. If they hadn't been alone on the planet, surely rumors would have flown about a certain couple having premarital sex in a certain garden. Egyptians gossiped with hieroglyphics, American Indians with smoke signals, frontiersmen with Pony Express riders. One of the driving forces behind many technological advances, if you really study it, has been not only to more effectively facilitate the slaughter of our fellow man, but also to facilitate the infliction of more subtle and far more entertaining injuries. During the late winter and early spring of 2009 in Wilson, Tennessee, rumor had it that Willard Blevins, you know, Mac's boy, was possessed by a devil in his laptop. Nobody blamed his parents, Mac and Eleanor, for giving the 12-year-old a gizmo that came preloaded with, in addition to all its other apps, a freaking entity. They were from a different time, a generation that considered programming the VCR and getting the coffee maker to brew before you woke up to be all the technical know-how required of someone without a college degree. And there were no degrees in the Blevins family, and none were expected. Most likely because the family tree wasn't exactly overrun with branches. Mac's father was Eleanor's mother's cousin. Eleanor's sister's husband was Mac's uncle's cousin's boy. It didn't make for a high prospect of a biochemist in the family's future, but it sure made it easy to find an organ donor, which was infinitely more practical. His father got Willard the laptop mainly for its video games because, as Mac put it, the little shit's always wanting to change the goddamn channel from NASCAR. His son's aversion to stock car racing prompted Mac to wonder on occasion if the boy wasn't his, but he had done the bone dance with Eleanor plenty of times and couldn't for the life of him imagine anyone else wanting to go through that. It took Willard some time to figure out how to work his new toy, and at first all he could do with it was play Dungeon Hunter, which Mac was relieved to discover at least involved killing. The boy had always been something of a loner. His weight problem attracted derision from his classmates and eliminated most sports as an activity option, and Mac and Eleanor were both happy to see him while away his free hours doing something he seemed to enjoy more than sitting on the couch bitching about what was on TV. They often heard him in his room shouting gleefully at the death of another enemy combatant in the sacred land of Gothicus, and while they couldn't really comprehend his reports of progress using words like warlord and astromancer, if it relieved them from seemingly incessant interruptions of watching cars driving around in a circle, they were all for it. About a month earlier, the joyful sounds of villain-killing exultation suddenly ceased. Mac told Eleanor he was afraid their son might be burned out. "God damn it," he growled, "he's going to be back in here bitching about what's on TV." Eleanor concurred in the way she'd concurred for years. She silently nodded her head, her eyes glued to the flat screen. Occasionally she grunted, but mainly reserved such outbursts for family crises. Mac had hoisted himself out of his comfy recliner, pretty much the only exercise he got these days, ever since he'd lost a big toe in a drunken bowling accident and got a hefty settlement check, and waddled down the hall to Willard's closed bedroom door. He'd been about to walk in when he thought he heard a faint but only vaguely familiar sound from inside the boy's room. It was not dissimilar to the sound made by squirrels in the attic, but obviously that wasn't it. A few moments later it dawned on him. He walked back into the living room, a strange expression on his face. "Eleanor." Though the tone of his voice didn't seem particularly urgent, there was something about it that had pulled his wife's eyes from the TV screen. "Huh?" Mac paused a moment, almost as if he couldn't actually commit to words the thought in his head, yet neither could he hold it back. "I think Willard's in there goddamn typing." Eleanor's jaw had dropped and rested on her Titanic-sized bosom. "Shut the front door." This was not only as close as Eleanor ever came to swearing, it was also one of her rare complete sentences. "I shit you not, can't think of what else it might be." Eleanor's curiosity, usually a slumbering, dim-witted beast, overcame her aversion to getting off the couch for anything, the family's nightly dinner notwithstanding, but going to the bathroom, refilling her iced tea, or popping a snack into the microwave oven, which she usually tried to consolidate into a single trip, such was the exertion of rising from the sofa even with all her toes, and she gripped the padded armrest and lumbered to her feet. Mac had been almost as mystified by this as he was by the goings-on in their son's room. "Dang, Eleanor, it ain't even a commercial." If looks could slap, Mac would have been smacked. Without waiting for further reply, Mac turned and walked down the hall, Eleanor just behind. The couple paused, as side by side as logistically possible with two such bodies in the narrow hallway, just outside the closed bedroom door, listening, but the labored breathing of not one but two fat people drowned out whatever faint sounds might have been emanating from the room. "Shh," Mac whispered. "Shh, what?" "Stop breathing." Eleanor backhanded his shoulder, the sound absorbed by Mac's circus tent-sized flannel shirt. "You stop breathing." With the dual behemoths momentarily completely silent, the only sounds in the house were the faint whirring of the ceiling fan in the living room, barely audible over the TV's inanity, and the distinctive clickety-clickety-clack of the laptop's keyboard from behind Willard's closed door. Mac and Eleanor exhaled simultaneously, looking at one another wide-eyed, Eleanor surprised, Mac with an "I-told-you-so" expression. "Shut the front door," Eleanor whispered. "You think he's doing homework?" Mac whispered back. It's not an easy thing to whisper a responsive grunt, but that's what Eleanor did. Without awaiting further response or encouragement, he was 48 years old after all, and it could be a long wait, Mac quickly turned the knob and opened Willard's door. "Shut the front door," Eleanor said for a third time, and Mac would have thought her incessant yakking nearly intolerable if his attention hadn't been elsewhere. Willard sat on his twin-sized unmade bed, his pudgy legs stretched out and crossed at the ankles, his back resting against the headboard, his computer opened on his lap, his fingers racing across the keyboard, his eyes staring through his dirty blonde stringy bangs at either the opposite wall or nothing at all. Mac and Eleanor took all this in exactly the amount of time it took for the sound waves from the opening of the door and Eleanor "shut the front door" to reach their son's dirty ears, for his gaze quickly turned their direction as he slammed his laptop shut. "I can't believe I fucking lost my fucking capo again," he said. Love is only overrated by those who are not in it. Love is a timeless, ageless thing, overwhelming the senses identically at 50 as at 15, a meeting of the heart and mind that is not replicated by any other experience, physical, emotional, instinctual, biological. Love is all these things, and the only singularly human phenomenon that absolutely requires reciprocation in order to function at that level which defines it, which makes it the most desirable and aspired to state of our all too short and unhappy existence. Left unrequited, love is a cancer that cannot be cut out, an insidious state of mental and physical anguish, curable only by the passage of enough time necessary to return its victim to a state of deluding themselves that it's overrated. So how does one separate true romantic love from raw animal passion? Elementary, my dear, one doesn't. The latter can thrive without the former, but not vice versa, at least not until love ages, the maturing of a fine wine, becoming a wiser and stronger and more comfortable love, perhaps to compensate for the weakening of physical desire. But in the beginning, love needs fucking, and a lot of it. Angel and I fed our love like a starving puppy, at the very least daily, sometimes hourly, sometimes with scraps under the kitchen table. Not sure what that means exactly, but we did once make love on the kitchen floor and wound up under the table, the same one she'd drunk me under on more than one occasion. From the night we met at a bar in Nashville where me and my band the Cow Tippers were playing a gig, I thought her name rather ironic as she introduced herself to me by showing me the tattoo on her tit, and proceeded from there to introduce me to carnal pleasures that would make Lucifer say, "That's nasty," and spank his monkey. I was 42 and had been writing and playing songs for over half my life. In that entire time, I'd never got laid as a direct result of playing, which, regardless of what any lying-ass musician says, was one of the reasons I'd picked up the guitar in the first place. After nearly 2 decades since my initial foray to Music City, I'd got sick to death of the place. The final straw had been, along with a major heartbreak, a big-ass billboard right outside the window of the Music Row sandwich joint I'd been busting my hiney in for nearly 10 years, of the latest country sensation, a teeny bopper named Billy Gilman, who to me epitomized everything that was wrong with the biz. I'd always thought that country music was supposed to be about the lives and trials and tribulations of the common man, performed and often written by artists who you could believe had actually lived and trialed and tribulated. This little Billy Gilman dipstick couldn't write his name in the dirt with a stick if you spotted him the B, and his greatest tribulation had been his terror over the strange fuzz growing around his peanut-sized marbles. So I'd said fuck it and moved to Austin, Texas, my second journey to the live music capital of the world. Less than a year later, I'd got signed to a label out of New York City. Guess where they moved me? Yep, fucking Nashville. May the circle jerk be unbroken. I wasn't bitching too much. It was far better to live in Nashville as a guy with a record deal than it was as a guy looking for a record deal. The prez of the label, Phil, thought I was talented as all get out and told anybody who'd listen that I was a gem. Even nicer than the accolades were the checks he'd send me after I'd gone through my advance on those occasions when my day gig didn't quite cover my basic requirements. You know, rent and utilities and bars and beer and cigs and the whatnot, which was not infrequently. If you've got something to fall back on, you'll always fall back. While the first CD had been pretty much ignored except for some minor airplay, which I'll tell you about later, the second one, with some major players on it, had come out and got pretty good press. One national publication said that I combined laugh-out-loud lyrics with solid rhythm guitar and vocals, and that I painted a vivid portrait of the dangers of love and relationships. I'd thought I was writing about being a musician for half my life and still not getting laid. I might have mentioned that. The press had led to more substantial airplay, which had led to some pretty cool gigs, which had led to Angel. I'd long ago stopped anticipating anything from playing shows apart from a good beer buzz and about an hour of feeling like the brightest light in the room. It's always amazed me how shy I can be for most of my existence, but how all those deep-seated insecurities can melt away with a few beers and my music and applause. And until Angel, it had amazed me that shit had never got me laid. I might have mentioned that. She'd been sitting at a table near the stage with two of her friends. There wasn't one among them I would have kicked out of bed for eating crackers, but she had an aura about her, a spark, a light, and a hell of a set of tits, which she'd flashed at me between our first and second encore. On her left breast was a tattoo that said simply, "My first tattoo," in fancy lettering like that. Of course, I damn near shit myself right on stage, which would have made me feel somewhat less than the brightest light in the room. Not so much because this beautiful woman had shown me her beautiful melons, which affected me in a completely different way, but because I'd only seen a tat like that one other place. On me. It had been quite the conversation piece since that Halloween night I'd had a few too many after work at the sandwich shop and staggered down the street to the Tattoo Parlor of the Stars. The guy who did it thought it so damn funny he put it up on their website, and Phil at the label thought it so typical me that it became the back of my second CD. So, needless to say, I figured this gal's titty tat was either a freakish coincidence or an indicator that I had found a really big fan. I was hoping it was the latter, reasoning that if a woman had put a fella's kind of trademark on her skin permanently, she might allow that same feller's doohickey in her giddy-up, at least temporarily. I also thought "Let Me Put My Doohickey in Your Giddy-Up" might make a cute country song. After the set, as the rest of the band began tearing down the equipment, I'd walk to the bar for a much-needed beer, only to find that she had already ordered one for me. I thanked her. She held out a long, smooth hand at the end of a long, smooth arm and introduced herself. "Hi, Jared. I'm Angel." Don't guess I've mentioned this by the by, but that's my name, Jared Whaley. Pleased to meet you, reader. I shook her hand and felt a little electrical thrill run up my arm, then zap me in the heart and groin. "How old were you before your parents realized they'd named you wrong?" I asked. She had laughed, all perfect lips and perfect teeth and perfect mouth and perfect pierced tongue. Perfect! Hey, she'd already shown me her tits and bought me a beer. Now she was laughing at my first joke. You'll excuse me if I found her flawless. She was about 5'10", an inch taller than me, but it seemed even more than that because she had good posture, whereas I was a lifelong slouch, with long dark hair and a model's long legs and slim hips and a porn star's fantabulous tatas. I guessed her to be about 22 and hoped she wasn't much younger than that, because I've always had a firm rule to not lust after women too close to my oldest daughter's age, which was 20 at the time. If Angel had told me she was only 19, it probably wouldn't have mattered. Passion sucks at math. "Well, Angel, you've got to tell me about that tattoo." She giggled and took a drink of beer, her hand wrapped sensuously around the bottle, bringing it provocatively to her mouth, her full red lips teasing the opening, seeming to draw the cool liquid to them rather than relying on the natural law of gravity. Hey, if I was that beer, I'd have wanted to be in her mouth too, even if I wasn't that beer actually, which obviously I wasn't. But I digress. I got it right after I bought your CD, which is right after it came out, she said, setting that lucky-ass bottle back on the bar. Would you sign it? It was my turn to take a drink, not that we were necessarily taking turns. Your CD or your tit? She laughed again, and that's when our eyes really met, beyond the glancing perfunctory dance which is a part of the male-female ritual, and I realized that the deep blue depths of those wonderful orbs were every bit as enticing as her other, perhaps more spank-worthy assets. Her gaze was unflinching, magnetic, and gave my own usually halting stare the gumption to be googly. She seemed to sense this, and a smile played at the corner of her luscious lips, which I only caught peripherally, stuck as I was in those unwavering windows to her soul. I just happen to have both with me, she said, her happy hormone-hyping hypnotics broken by the magical mirth of the moment. Geez Louise, I literally love alliteration. We both laughed, me as much in a funny ha-ha as a funny fucking awesome kind of way, although she was funny ha-ha too. Well, I said after the moment passed and we resumed our eye-fucking, the guys will be irate if I don't do a little manual labor. I'd already noticed a few silent, baleful stares between my fellow pickers and grinners as they unplugged and wrapped cords and hauled out amps and instruments. They usually only joked about it, but there had always been a slight underlying tension over how little heavy lifting I did, both before and after a gig. Hey, I was the front man. It was my job to socialize. Great work if you can get it. Won't take me long, then I'll get my Sharpie, I said, before almost literally dragging my happy ass from her desirable fantasy-inspiring realm for a brief sojourn to the real world. I felt her eyes on me as I made my way to the stage, unplugged my guitar and put it in the case, and started rapping my chord, not realizing I had just taken the first step in a not nearly long enough journey that would take me from the pinnacles of both physical and emotional bliss to the fire and brimstone-laden depths of despair and back again, and again, and again, not finally culminating till death did us part. I wasn't thinking about any of that at the time, though. I was looking around the stage, starting to get a little pissed, wondering where I'd put the little springy contraption that a mediocre guitar player such as myself clamps onto the strings in order to change keys without actually having to play different chords. God damn it, I said, as much to myself as to my bandmates. I can't believe I fucking lost my fucking capo again.